This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
And just for people who haven't been before, the format will be something like John will speak for about 40 to 50 minutes on unfolding text. Transatlantic influence and probably seriality in writing every high-end TV drama.
I'll just see unfolding text.
Then questions, discussion. We have goes through the Institute of English Studies, some wine to drink, and some water. So do stay, and I think we will go from the old John afterwards. In the meantime, just to say that I can also tell you a little bit about the forthcoming programme, because I have the next speaker, which will be I think the 5th of December, that Thursday, will be Petra Shepnik, who is both a kind of senior lecturer or associate professor at Masaryk University in Brno, and also works at the Prague Film Archive. And he is a kind of specialist in, he organised the Screen Industries in Central and Eastern Europe conference, and also a kind of theorising screenwriting conference, which was last year in Brno. And he's going to be talking about archive research and screenwriting policy in the socialist regimes. He's an extremely good scholar and researcher, and I think it will be, we're both very lucky to have him, and also pleased that he says I've been following your procedure on. He's been watching some of the kind of podcasting material. So I also want to say, if people are aware of, I think you probably may have to come because of flights for a couple of days. So likewise, if there are places where you think it would be appropriate for him to speak and have connections, that will be really helpful. He's he's going to be a good speaker. Not quite confirmed next year, but Paul Wells from Loughborough will be speaking in March, and I think that will be, will confirm send an email for the dates of the next meetings next term as well. So anyway, thank you for that. Maybe it's now time to introduce John. John is both the kind of I suppose somebody who's really talked about screenwriting studies in relation to television, both in the kind of voluminous and extremely important work he's done on Dennis Potter, on Peter Watkins, but also on kind of thinking about both how you might teach writing for television, and I think has founded or helped advise on setting up 2 different television courses, 2 MAs in writing for television particularly. There's been somebody who's maybe, for longer, maybe more than anyone else I can think of in academia, really kind of focused on what television writers have done, both in kind of looking at the body of work they've done, but maybe also thinking how they connect with the systems and the context in which they're writing, and has of course also carried out some interviews with Dennis Potter, which are still up on the website. So if you want to kind of still listen to Dennis talking about his work, that's still magically possible to do. I don't know what else I should be talking about specifically what you're working on. Maybe it's best if you take over your interest. Self-introduce from now on.
All right. Thanks very much, Adam. Thanks for inviting me, and hello to everyone here. I've had a long journey down from Scotland today, from Glasgow, as you can see from the screen, but it's a bit deja vu for me since 2 years ago I was here at the Singing Detective Symposium. So it's nice to be back and to be speaking again in Senate House. And what are we going to speak about? Well, it's, as you can see, it's a bit of a mouthful of a title. Really, it's quite wide-ranging, and it's going to partly I wrote this title to remind me of the things that I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to basically look particularly at this notion of the unfolding text, and for some of you that may ring some bells. And I'm also going to consider, because it is the 50th anniversary year, the 50th anniversary, I'm going to consider Doctor Who, and talk a little bit about Doctor Who, but I'm also going to go a bit wider and consider US TV drama as well. So it's fairly wide-ranging. I'll talk or busk for about 40 or 50 minutes, but I'd welcome questions later as well. And hopefully the talk will bind itself together, and you'll get a sense of how the various strands connect. But anyway, yes, I thought it was appropriate as we approach the 50th anniversary year to talk about Doctor Who, because I've written about Doctor Who in the past. I wrote I think it was the first academic analysis of the Doctor Who and the Daleks films, which I'm terribly proud not, written for a publication called British Science Fiction Cinema in 1999. And since then there's been quite a wave of Doctor Who scholarship. Many of you may know James Chapman's book, Inside the TARDIS, Cultural History of Doctor Who, and others like Brett Mills have written about Doctor Who academically. And indeed, a month or so ago there was a Doctor Who academic conference held at the University of Hertfordshire, which unfortunately I couldn't make it along to, but I don't know if anybody here was at that. I should ask as well, I noticed there are some TV studies academics here, but how many of you are practicing screenwriters? Actually practicing, not too many. How many of you are studying TV drama then? Most of you students or practicing screenwriters? It's a sort of mixed audience. Okay, it gives me a sense of how to pitch this then. Okay, well I'm going to talk about Doctor Who. It's the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who, and I actually many years ago interviewed the original creator of Doctor Who, Sidney Newman, or co-creator. There were many people who actually were involved, many hands involved in the creation of Doctor Who. But many years ago, when I actually was doing my Dennis Potter field research, I actually had a chance to sit and talk with Sidney Newman, not just about Dennis Potter, with whom he had been involved, but a little bit about Doctor Who. And I'll maybe mention this as well as we go. But if I don't get a chance to develop it, feel free in Q&A afterwards to ask me about that. But it's the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who next month. It's also actually the 30th anniversary of this publication, which before James Chapman, Matt Hills and there was this book by John Tulloch and Manuel Alvarado, Doctor Who, the Unfolding Text, hence the title, Unfolding Text. And I thought it was useful to reflect on this book. To my knowledge, it's the first academic study of Doctor Who that was published. It was published, I think, by Macmillan 30 years ago. So it's the 30th anniversary of this publication. And Alvarado and Tulloch, besides giving an analysis of Doctor Who per se, also within that text developed quite a useful typology of the time, of different forms of television drama. And of course, 30 years on, there's been many developments in the forms of television drama, some of which I'm going to speak about today. But it's quite useful, I think, just to remind ourselves, or to introduce to those who've never read the book, the typology that Alvarado and Tulloch set out in that book. It's one that I still reference today in my teaching of undergraduate students in television drama, albeit, as you will see, I certainly have to update it. But here's what Alvarado and Tulloch said. As part of their review and analysis of Doctor Who, they first set out what they thought were the predominant forms of television fiction of the time. Now, this was a time when the single play, for example, was still very much part of the British television landscape. It's largely gone now. But the most obvious categories that are still with us are the series and serial. But Alvarado and Tulloch make useful distinctions between different types of series and serial, and it's that I want to sort of introduce today, first of all, before we move on. They mentioned, or developed first of all, the idea of the continuous serial, which they suggested was characterised by the fact that it could run infinitely, and that it possesses multiple narrative strands which are introduced and concluded in different temporal periods. And more or less, they made that synonymous with the soap opera, and the examples that they used at the time, many of which are still with us today, include Coronation Street, Emmerdale. EastEnders hadn't been launched at that point, it wasn't launched until 1985, but they did mention others like Crossroads and Brookside, soaps that are no longer part of the British television landscape. So the continuous serial. So the continuous serial, synonymous in Alvarado and Tulloch's view with the soap opera. And then they went on to talk about the episodic serial. Which they suggested was the category at the time which they thought that Doctor Who belonged to at that time, which was, the episodic serial was characterised by there being narrative continuity between episodes, but only for a limited and specified number of episodes. And the viewer has to see all the episodes encompassed in one title to understand fully the narrative structure and closure. Now, they stated at that time that it wasn't a very common form, but they suggested that Doctor Who fits within that, in the sense that at the time, classic Doctor Who, before the revival of 2005, the original run of Doctor Who was in British television from 1963 to 1989. And at that time, Doctor Who had a series of maybe sort of, say, 26 episodes in the year, but split into various, what Tulloch and Alvarado call episodic serials, 4-parters, 6-parters sometimes, occasionally a 2-parter, but mainly 4 parts or 6 parts, in which the viewer had to watch all the different episodes to follow the narrative and ultimately get narrative closure. So this was the episodic serial that they talked about. Then they talked about the episodic series, which they suggested it was television's most common and enduring fictional format, and even argued that it could be called the one fictional mode that television could be claimed to have invented. And the episodic series is where each episode consists of complete, discrete narratives, but the only continuity is between the main protagonists and the main locations. There is no narrative continuity. So this classic American television drama of the 60s, 70s and 80s fit within this typology. The examples that Alvarado and Tulloch used were, for example, Starsky and Hutch. Can you remember that? From the 70s, Hawaii Five-O, the original. Although I would argue, not having seen all the episodes of the new Hawaii Five-O, I would say that still largely follows that format of the narrative closure within each episode. And many other detective and cop shows of the 70s followed that format. Then Alvarado and Tulloch talked about the final form within this series and serial typology, which was the sequential series, which they suggested was close to the episodic serial, but nevertheless a separate category. It's characterised by the fact that while each episode constitutes a complete narrative structure and experience, there will invariably be an enigma posed at the end of each episode, or a cliffhanger, that will propel the viewer onto the next episode. And they mentioned, and this was in 1983, they mentioned sort of early episodes of Dallas, the original Dallas, which ran from 1978, I think, to 1990, which very early episodes of Dallas tended to be discrete episodes with discrete narratives, similar to the episodic series, but in which there would be a cliffhanger. And gradually Dallas mutated into more of a soap opera as the 80s wore on, became, if you like, more of a continuous serial. But the sequential series, a category that Alvarado and Tulloch identified at that time. Now, looking at Doctor Who of the period, Alvarado and Tulloch suggested that Doctor Who fitted within the episodic serial, but they recognised that it had an uneasy fit because it wasn't like a 6-part serial that then concluded. It was more hybrid than that, in the sense that it was also a series of episodes that ran what we would call now a season, that ran for, say, 26 weeks in the year, in the classic iteration, during its heyday, its ratings heyday in the 70s and early 80s. So the Doctor Who, in classic Doctor Who in that sense, also conformed to some elements of the series as well. So Alvarado and Tulloch used the term the unfolding text to describe Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who, in the sense that you start in the 60s with this old man, enigmatic old man who steals a time machine, and gradually you find out more and more about the character, more and more is revealed. The Doctor encounters more and more villains and enemies, and gradually a whole story world starts to open up until we have a very rich kind of story universe, a very rich franchise, if you like. So this was Alvarado and Tulloch's view of Doctor Who in 1983, and arguably we can see that science fiction and cult TV in general, that the successful franchises can work as unfolding text. We can look at Star Trek, for example, the Star Trek universe that opens up. Also, other sort of cult shows like from the late 90s, early 2000s, Buffy the Vampire Slayer as well. And of course, the attraction of science fiction and cult TV is that they attract devoted viewers. They can attract casual viewers, what cultists call the mundanes, who are just sort of interested in maybe casually watching the show. But these shows tend to encourage devotion and loyalty, and viewers who get into this and explore this world with. And in many respects, therefore, you can see them as kind of mirror images of the soap opera audience. The soap opera, we've got some distinguished soap opera scholars in here tonight who have very lucidly explained about the fact that soap operas create a very rich story world in which the audiences are extremely intelligent and you need a lot of narrative skill to follow these soap operas over many years. And arguably, you could see science fiction and cult TV franchises, if you like, the soap operas for the alternative crowd. So if mainstream viewers are attracted to soap operas, science fiction, and cult, particularly cult audiences, define themselves as different from the mainstream, and they, in a sense, get into their alternative forms of soap opera through Star Trek, Doctor Who, and so on. But here we are in the multi-channel TV age, 30 years on, and coming on to what I really want to sort of major on today, which is the sense that I would say that in the multi-channel TV age, as numerous scholars have suggested, we are now in an age of hybridity between the series and serial, where you have series, if you like, which have strong elements of serial continuity, and also the soap opera elements have come into long-form television fiction. Particularly, we can all think of examples from America, which have the interweaving storylines of soap operas. So, arguably, the various typology categories have started to blur and merge, and in many respects, the idea of the unfolding text, the rich story universe, has become more and more mainstream as a result of these developments. Now, some of you will know this, the work of theorists like Robin Nelson, others may not. Robin Nelson, in his quite influential book, published in 1997, TV Drama and Transition, used the term flexi-narrative in this context. The sense that narrative and form have become increasingly flexible in terms of the way in which the stories are told. No longer do they necessarily fit into tight, rigid categories of the serial with narrative continuity versus the series with no narrative continuity. Instead, there's flexibility in the way that stories are told. And as numerous scholars, not just Robin Nelson, have pointed out, US TV US TV drama has increasingly been seen to be leading the way on these developments with what is now often talked about as long-form television fiction, with lots and lots of seasons of shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, Mad Men, and so on. And now we're in a situation where, as a result of these sort of developments, that in a sense British television, old British television, is kind of struggling to catch up in terms of the vanguard of development in television drama. And we do see, read discourses in the newspapers and elsewhere, popular discourses, that increasingly American television drama is quote-unquote superior now to British television drama in the way that it's complex storytelling that takes account of the intelligence and sophistication of its audience. So, for me, and I guess for others maybe here as well with longer memories, it's a world almost turned upside down, because it's very useful to remind ourselves of how far we've actually come in terms of this kind of transatlantic debate between British television drama and US television drama, the cutting edge aspects of US TV drama. Here, for example, is Clive James writing 30 years ago, and here's an example of sort of popular received critical opinion from the past on British TV drama and versus American US TV drama. This is Clive James writing when he was just finished, I think, being TV critic of The Observer from the 70s to the early 80s. This is James's words. American television is undoubtedly worse than British television. A daily nightmare and a nightly daydream on all three main networks, producing an effect on the constant viewer likely to reduce him, according to James, sexistly, to a zombie. British television provides enough worthwhile programming, however, to convince even the most demanding viewer that he, again, is not necessarily committing suicide by tuning in regularly. And he goes on, there's more. In Britain, if a big bad classic drama series has been taken at the estimation of its producers and has been ridiculously overpraised, he, again, the TV critic, can compare it with a finely judged play that went comparatively unnoticed last week. In other words, British television is not homogeneous. British television is heterogeneous. It is a culture, or at any rate, part of one. So you can see how far we've actually come, and of course one can deconstruct that in many different ways, the sort of perhaps smugness, condescension, and certainly the sexism of the idea of the viewer as being a he. And also, the history of British TV drama, and this is where I would like to argue slightly differently to James, but taking a longer view, is that we can argue actually that the history of British TV drama is not so splendidly isolationist as all of this might suggest. The sense that somehow British television drama historically was a culture, an indigenous culture, separate from this alien intruder American television drama. Instead, you can sort of muddy the context and the categories and actually look at the transatlantic influence that's always gone on in the history of American and British television drama. And that also in turn helps us to contextualize some of the present developments in American long-form TV drama and its relationship to British TV drama. Because the British tradition, identified by Clive James, an Australian, of course, in the early 1980s as part of the culture that US TV lacked, actually, if you look historically, owed much of its origins and popular success to developments in North America. And this is where I want to come back to our guy, Sidney Newman, the guy that I said was the leading developer, if you like, of Doctor Who in 1963. Because Sidney Newman was not a Brit, he was a Canadian. TV producer, but a Canadian who had worked in the white commercial heat of early US commercial television and who had been very attuned to the need for ratings and had an extremely commercial instinct. And Newman, as I said, I actually sat with Newman for most of the day listening to him talk. He was, by that stage, it was 1990, he was about sort of over 70, and he was at the stage of his career when he really wanted to talk. And so although I'd come along ostensibly just to talk to him about Dennis Potter, we arranged over his entire career, including Doctor Who. So I managed to get some interesting nuggets from on the creation of Doctor Who. And reviewing his career, Newman made clear to me that he had worked in North American television in the late 40s, early 50s, on secondment from Canadian television, really to learn how television was done in America so that they could bring it back into the context of CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company in Canada. And in Canada, Newman produced in various genres, but became most famous for producing drama and a series of plays, an anthology play series, that got Newman noticed when a number of these plays were shown on British television in the 50s. And it was as a result of that he was lured to Britain in 1958 to work on the new commercial television, ITV, as the supervisor of drama, effectively the head of drama at ABC Television, the then London ITV franchise holder. And Newman was part of a wave, actually, of ITV talent poaching from Canada. A number of directors and producers and script editors as well were lured over at this time. I mean, ITV launched in 1955 as a competitor to the public service BBC, the first commercial television network in Britain. And of course, they didn't really know how to do it. So they looked across the Atlantic, but not to the ultra-commercial US system, because the way that ITV had been set up, it was a classic British compromise between commercials in the sense that they were showing advertisements, but at the same time, in the early days, a very strong public service context. So as a result, they looked to the more public service orientated CBC to try and lure people over who might have a commercial instinct, but at the same time some public service sensibilities. And Newman fitted this category exactly, because in an earlier incarnation he had worked at the National Film Board of Canada with the famous documentary producer John Grierson, the Scot, who had basically founded the British documentary film movement of the 1930s and 40s. So you had that public service side to him as well. And Newman comes into British television, at a time when it's a very class-bound, hierarchical system in Britain, social system, and in many respects he gives British television, if you like, he along with other Canadians and others from overseas, a bit of a zing to British television that perhaps, very informal term, but a bit of a zing that perhaps British television had lacked. And so with shows like Doctor Who, he brought science fiction sensibility, but married it to a public service broadcasting context. He was poached to become head of BBC TV drama in 1963, and it was there that he sketched out the idea for Doctor Who. And he was very influenced by the film version of the H.G. Wells' The Time Machine that had just come out a few years before, in the 1960s. Some of you may have seen it. It's a Technicolor film starring Rod Taylor as H.G. Wells' time traveller. Newman was influenced by that and took the idea of a frock-coated Victorian-type gentleman travelling around in a time machine. And that is the basic origins of Doctor Who. And then he developed it along with Donald Wilson, the then head of serials at the BBC, and others, and to become the Doctor Who that was launched in 1963 and that we're about to commemorate the 50th anniversary of. But Newman also worked on other shows like The Avengers. He created and set out the template for the show that would eventually become The Avengers. But also he worked in the single play and was a champion of the single play, both in ABC Television, where he ran Armchair Theatre, which effectively, according to Troy Kennedy Martin, imported a working class theatre of regional dialect, dialect and character to British television for the first time. And he introduced sort of working class, if you like, kitchen sink drama for the first time in British television, greatly influenced by developments going on in British theatre and also new wave cinema at the time. So Newman is an enormous figure, and next month an adventure in time and space is going to be broadcast, which written by Mark Gatiss, which looks at the origins of Doctor Who in 1963. And Sidney Newman is going to be played by Brian Cox, which is going to be quite interesting, because I remember Sidney Newman standing about 5 foot nothing, and Brian Cox is a huge, bulky Scotsman. Anyway, we'll see what Cox's portrayal is like. So Sidney Newman, maybe not a name, a familiar household name at the moment, will probably become one next month when that show is broadcast, the origins of Doctor Who. Now let's flash forward to Doctor Who in the 2000s, because as you all know, Doctor Who was very successfully revived in 2005, initially under Russell T Davies, and in many respects has transformed the ecosystem of contemporary television drama, certainly in the minds of the commissioners. Ecosystem, I think it's very useful to look at television drama in Britain as a kind of ecosystem, ecology, and changes to that ecosystem, new developments can affect a lot of the television drama, not just science fiction around it. And the Doctor Who effect, effectively, has been, since 2005, a successful revival with Russell T Davies, the rediscovery of the appeal of British TV fantasy and science fiction of all kinds. Before that, science fiction was a joke. In 2005, just before the new Doctor was actually edited in 2004 and published in 2005, just before the launch of the Russell T Davies Doctor Who, I co-edited a book called British Science Fiction Television, A Hitchhiker's Guide, in which in the introduction, myself and my co-editor Peter Wright lamented the fact that British science fiction television seemed to be moribund, although we looked forward to the possibility of a success no means guaranteed of the new Doctor Who. So a year later, Doctor Who is everywhere. British TV science fiction and fantasy suddenly becomes sexy. And suddenly a show like Life on Mars, which had been languishing in the commissioner's desk since the late 90s, co-created by Matthew Graham and Ashley Fail, who said at that time nobody in British television, BBC, Channel 4, ITV, wanted to know about this show. A time-travelling cop, get out of here. But after Doctor Who, suddenly the doors open, and Life on Mars is commissioned for 3 successful series and a follow-up, Ashes to Ashes. So the rediscovery of the appeal of British TV fantasy, but also, crucially, the family TV audience. Doctor Who plays into nostalgia. Parents who remember watching it as a child sit their kids in front of it, so the theory or the myth goes, and the family audience is rediscovered. The idea, television commissioners suddenly realised that perhaps on a Saturday night, families may actually want to watch again as an audience. Before that, the dominant fashionable theory was that everybody was watching in their different rooms, the kids and watching the portable TV as it was in the the bedrooms, and the mother and father watching in the living room. Doctor Who also brings about the notion in British television of event television. Suddenly, each week it becomes an event. But also the lucrative potential in the UK of high concept drama, which the Americans had done for a long time. The American system is based on the pitching of concepts to the networks. So the concept is king in US TV drama, in a way that in British television has tended, traditionally, although with very notable exceptions such as Dennis Potter, has tended to privilege realism of character and situation rather than the concept, such as time-traveling cop or guy goes back to Atlantis, as in the current Saturday night fantasy series. So the Doctor Who rediscovers all of this, and in a sense it's more of a context that is familiar from US TV drama, the rediscovery of science fiction and fantasy TV and concepts of all kinds. At the same time, though, we can see the influence of America as being very strong in the Doctor Who revival, just as strong as it was with Sidney Newman's Canadian influence back in 1963. Because behind the quintessential Britishness on screen of Doctor Who, there is a very beating American heart. And here is a key quote which is not as widely discussed, I think, as it should be in relation to trying to understand contemporary Doctor Who. It's a key quote from Russell T Davies who was writing at the end of the first season of Doctor Who, the revival, in 2005. On screen, he said, the Doctor was deliberately flying the flag as a very British icon. Route Master buses, Big Ben, Simon Cowell, who played Charles Dickens in the first season. While off-screen, the concept was given a very American kick up the arse. We built in sweeps episodes, event episodes and two-part stories placed strategically throughout the run that was designed to boost ratings. The last in the series quickly became the season finale. And we did not just learn structure from the States, we stole story. So many good dramas, thank you Buffy the Vampire Slayer, had expanded the genre. They showed us that if you can laugh and cry in the middle of a story, then the adventure is that much better. So there, of course, Russell T Davies is acknowledging the fact that the modern Doctor Who, the contemporary Doctor Who, very much works in a US context that we know is the equivalent of the long-form fiction that we've seen in American TV drama. So, for example, it's 13 episodes now. It's got a showrunner. The idea of the showrunner, the kingpin who sets the tone for the whole season and who writes the crucial episodes and the crucial story arcs. All of this is borrowing heavily from American television. And as T. Davies acknowledges, is very much influenced in the case of his version of Doctor Who by Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy the Vampire Slayer had that. It had the sweeps episodes, it had event storylines, and it has story arcs to reward loyal fans. Now, interestingly, Russell T Davies changed the form of Doctor Who to fit this more modern context of American context where audiences have been used to watching science fiction and fantasy TV in America, American imports. So Doctor Who changes from an episodic serial in Alvarado and Tulloch's old typology to much closer to a sequential series where you have to watch each of the episodes in order to understand the narrative, and where there are narrative arcs to reward loyal viewers. But Russell T Davies didn't want to alienate the casual viewer who might tune in just to watch an episode of the Daleks, for example. But at the same time, he wanted to get that cult audience, that loyal audience who love the franchise, and grow it, not just the existing Whovians who were still loyal to the show 15 years after it had ended, but to grow a new audience. And that's what Doctor Who did very successfully. To such an extent that drama commissioners are now saying, right, we want the next Doctor Who, we want the next science fiction fantasy show. Concept increasingly becomes king. Now we can see this influence, for example, in the end of Doctor Who Series 1. Bad Wolf is the story arc of Russell T Davies' first season of Doctor Who. A leitmotif that sort of runs throughout the show as an enigma. Here it's scrawled and graffitied on the TARDIS, and we don't know until the very end what actually the Bad Wolf is. And this echoes, almost literally, Joss Whedon's big bad that he used in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which basically had each episode had a self-contained story in Buffy, but it contributed to a larger storyline that was broken down into sort of season-long narratives, marked by the rise and defeat of a powerful villain, commonly referred to in Sly by Whedon as the Big Bad. So Whedon's Big Bad is Russell T Davies' Bad Wolf. So I think we can see, therefore, that transatlantic influence has been there throughout the history of Doctor Who, through such change in that sense. It was there in the conception of it under the Canadian Sidney Newman, who had worked in US television, and it was there certainly in Russell T Davies's conception of it in 2005. And although we've now got what might be called the Stephen Moffat era, with certainly considerable changes from Russell T Davies's era, at the same time, the basic format, the form, the sequential series with story arcs and with enigmas, such as in the recent run of Doctor Who earlier in the year, the enigma of who was the impossible girl, Clara, the impossible girl, that we eventually find out in the payoff, the name of the Doctor, which was the final episode before the 50th anniversary special was coming up. We have all of these elements still in place. So Stephen Moffat hasn't really tinkered much with the underlying form of new Doctor Who. But what he has managed to do is crack America in a way that Doctor Who had never done before. Doctor Who goes out on BBC America. If any of you have been to Los Angeles over the last couple of years, I went there a year or so ago and was astonished going down Sunset Boulevard to be seeing a giant poster of Matt Smith as Doctor Who, because as a Brit I think of Doctor Who as only having limited appeal in America, but it's been pushed out there very hard. Craig Ferguson's Late shows constantly having Doctor Who actors and characters on to interview them. And BBC America is pushing it, and as a result, more people are watching it, and it's probably, along with Downton Abbey, British television dramas key export at the moment, at a high-end British TV drama export. Now, what do I mean by high-end? Well, I'm picking that up from Robin Nelson's definition in a later book of his called State of Play, Contemporary High-End. To mean this: big budgets, high production values associated with them, along with a prime time position in the schedule of a major channel. And crucially, multi-layered and generically hybrid, partly in an attempt to appeal to audiences beyond its primary target market. Now, Nelson recognises that such a term as high-end is very loose and fluid, and he acknowledges that any definition can be vague, but he uses that as a working definition in his book. Now, looking at US television drama, I think we can all see where the much acclaimed high-end US TV dramas have been over the last 10 years. The Sopranos kicking it off, really, this vogue now for long-term American TV drama. The Wire, very successfully in critical terms, well, less in ratings terms compared to The Sopranos. More recently, Mad Men, and just recently now, just ending its final season, Breaking Bad. These and others are the sort of what's called the high end of US TV drama, and have been acclaimed for their complex storytelling, their rich characterizations, their rich storylines, and the way in which they work as unfolding texts, gradually over season after season, revealing more and more nuance and detail about the world. In the same way, I would argue, as earlier science fiction shows like Star Trek did, the various iterations of Star Trek: Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, and so on. But this time, it's not confined to the science fiction and cult TV category by any means. Now, this is beginning to affect British television drama as well. I mean, it was noticeable, for example, at this year's McTaggart lecture that Kevin Spacey, who gave it, the actor Kevin Spacey, who was talking about the next development of long-form fiction, which is online, Netflix, and the fact that Netflix have commissioned their first original drama that was put online, all 13 episodes, instead of being sold to a television network first. So as a result, this is very much on the radar of British television drama commissioners. It's clear from discussions and industry debates that British television drama commissioners are looking with one eye over at the success of these dramas. And the question becomes how, so in one sense it's a pressure on them, on the other hand it's also an influence, and the question is how to compete, but also in a sense how perhaps to replicate some of this so-called quality. So in a sense, it's the triumph, if you like, of seriality, these dramas. These dramas have shown that, in a sense, the rhythms of serial television are perhaps, quote-unquote, the most natural for television. And that the serial form seems to have trounced, at least in critical acclaim, the episodic series and other forms. And certainly the episodic series does not get the acclaim that it does of these US TV dramas, although it's important to note that the episodic series is still very much a staple of contemporary US network television drama. The ABC, CBS, NBC. But I'd like to sort of end today by looking at some issues around seriality and the sort of vogue for long-form drama. Some of the drawbacks, some of the problems, problem, quote unquote. One is picking up a little bit on a phrase that's always stuck with me from John Fiske's 1987 study, Television Culture, where he was referring to soap opera as being characterised by the infinitely extended middle. Well, long-form, high-end television drama increasingly has this, an infinitely extended middle, which allows these shows to go on and on and on without necessarily reaching any immediate closure. Now, in one sense, this creates a rich story world, but on the other hand, can also create problems of unresolved storylines and of characters appearing and then disappearing and leading to sort of a lack of aesthetic closure. A good example from The Sopranos is the episode season, I think it's season 3, episode 11, called Pine Barrens, which is in which two gangsters, Christopher Moltisanti and Polly Galtieri, find themselves stranded with a mad Russian in the pine woods, remote pine woods of New Jersey. And the episode has been acclaimed as almost being cinematic in terms of its characterization of these gangsters under pressure. But the problem was, in a sense, that the character of the Russian who they try to kill but who survives never appears anywhere else in the rest of The Sopranos. And that led to criticisms from fans that where was the Russian? Where was this Russian guy? And in fact, at the beginning, I think it is of season 4 of The Sopranos, it's even made as an in-joke amongst the gangsters who are talking to themselves, saying, what happened to that Russian guy? So David Chase, the showrunner of The Sopranos, argued that this, it doesn't matter about the Russian, it was about the themes that we were exploring in the episode. But the problem, it can raise a problem, the unresolved storylines with the infinitely extended middle and the need to go on and on and on and to develop new storylines, so picking up new ones and dropping others. So that can be a problem, one problem of these long-form fictions. Another can be the tyranny of the showrunner. Tyranny, I use in quotes. That's Aaron Sorkin with the cast of HBO's Newsroom. And one problem here is that while the showrunner can get his or her creative rocks off in a sense with these long-form television dramas, there is often for the writers that work under them a lack of absolute creative freedom in the sense that they are inherit a set of characters and they have to do interesting and ingenious permutations with them, but everything is set by the showrunner, who ultimately calls the shots, the creative producer. And the ambition of many American television writers is to become the showrunner, to become the person who runs the show. Now, in the case of Aaron Sorkin, he has been criticised, for example, for credit hogging. Aaron Sorkin, if you look at the writing credits for Aaron Sorkin dramas, such as The West Wing, such as The Newsroom, he features in almost every one, and yet he doesn't, he couldn't possibly contribute to everything, to all these episodes. Instead, what happens is he has a team of writers, and they develop storylines and ideas, and then he puts the Aaron Sorkin dialogue polish often on top of them. But he has been criticised as being a credit hogger. So there's that aspect of long-form fiction. Also what I would call, very unscientifically, the cranking of the gears with long-form science fiction. In the sense that, long-form television drama, in the sense that you have, in order to keep this drama going, once it becomes a commercial success, there's a commercial imperative to keep the drama going by the network, HBO, or Showtime, or AMC. So you have to introduce new characters. And in this case, here's Tony Blundetto, played by Steve Buscemi, who's introduced in season 4 of The Sopranos as the long-lost cousin of Tony Soprano, sprung from jail or released from jail 17 years after being put away for I think, armed robbery. And we're told that he and Tony were extremely close, grew up as cousins together, loved each other, and yet, having watched all the previous episodes of The Sopranos before season 4, I don't remember being mentioned at all. And of course, he's introduced in order for there to be new storylines and new developments, 2 Tonys instead of one Tony Soprano. So the cranking of the gears, you can sort of feel the writers sort of cranking the gears here to try and introduce new developments and new storylines to keep these dramas going. So, I mean, David Chase, the showrunner of The Sopranos, said as much and admitted as much in an interview this year with The Guardian that The Sopranos had become, quote unquote, a bit of a corporation because of the need to keep it going and the need constantly to please the network. Now, I'm going to sort of conclude today by showing you a little clip which seems to be a very interesting commentary on some of these issues within The Sopranos itself. And this is the opening of season 6, the final season of The Sopranos, which was split in production and transmission between 2006 and 2007. This was shown in 2006 originally. So have a look at this. Hopefully we can get the clip to work from YouTube. Helpfully in this sequence from YouTube, it's actually got subtitles, so that's useful. So have a look at this, and then I'll talk about it. Here we go.
Nobody ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American public.
Ancient Egyptians postulated 7 souls. Top soul, and the first to leave at the moment of death, is Ren, the secret name. This corresponds to my director. He directs the film of your life from conception to death. The secret name is the title of your film. When you die, that's where Ren came in. Second soul and second one off the sinking ship is second. Energy, power, light. The director gives the orders. Second presses the right button. Number 3 is Cool, the guardian angel. He, she, or it is third man out. Number 4 is Bob, the heart, often treacherous. Number 5 is Ka, the devil. The Ka, which usually reaches adolescence at the time of bodily death, is the only reliable guide to the land of the dead.
Who's going to live here? The family? I'll have it finished by October. I'm worried, Aid.
Everybody's worried.
No, I'm worried all the time.
of Sopranos season 6. Now, I think certainly from that sequence you can see that David Chase and his team are certainly not underestimating the intelligence of the American public, because the music there is from a band called Material, and the voice that you hear is William S. Burroughs reading from his novel The Western Lands, which is the final part of a trilogy, and the title refers to the western bank of the Nile River, which in Egyptian mythology was the land of the dead. So this is a William Burroughs novel that's inspired by the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Very esoteric reference for a drama like The Sopranos. And it looks forward and anticipates what the major event that happens at the end of that episode. I'm not giving it away for anyone that hasn't seen it, but Tony Soprano gets shot and spends the next, hovers between life and death, spends the next few episodes in a limbo land between life and death. And so he walks through, in a sense, the land of the dead. So all the, a very, very sophisticated, very sophisticated sequence. At the same time, though, you might have noticed the little image of the train stopped, Nesquik, and the guy opening the FedEx package as well. I've done a bit of research on this and think is this product placement in The Sopranos, and what is going on here? Well, actually, there is product placement in The Sopranos and a lot of HBO dramas. We're told, at least from what I've been able to find out from doing some preliminary research on this, that the product placement is what we call realistic product placement. It's not paid for product placement in the sense that a company pays HBO to advertise their products on screen, to place their products on screen. But it's certainly the case that Tony Soprano uses Motorola and Nokia cell phones. Soprano's characters uses Apple computers. Christopher Moltisanti, one of Tony's henchmen, drives Lexus and Range Rover autos. Coke and Pepsi are voluminously drunk in the show. Interestingly, the gangsters drink Coke and the federal agents drink Pepsi, which is quite interesting. So there is product placement, and lots of companies clamour to place their products in HBO dramas. Regarding product placement on The Sopranos, a guy called Mark DeMassimo of DeMassimo Brand Advertising had this to say. He said, "It's the product placement on The Sopranos is the best of all worlds. You have no commercial messages to compete with because HBO doesn't show ads, it's a subscription channel. People watch the episodes over and over again. Then they buy them on videotape and DVD and watch them again. For marketers, it's an offer that they can't refuse." So it does indicate that The Sopranos by its end had become a corporation, and clearly there's a profit motive involved in this kind of drama. So we should be aware of that these dramas appear and produced within a highly commercial context, albeit by writers and producers like David Chase, who I think this is his sardonic commentary at the beginning, where they linger on the Nesquik on the train. I think that's his little comment. And there are other examples of what appear to be sardonic comments on product placement throughout various seasons of The Sopranos. And if you want later, I can talk about these. But to end today, in my talk, HBO is now highly profitable as a result of the success of these shows. Its annual revenue is $4 billion in 2012, of which $1 billion is pure profit. And HBO is part itself of the Time Warner Group, which is the second largest media and entertainment conglomerate in the world. Interestingly, Walt Disney Corporation is the largest. A certain news corporation, Mr. Murdoch's organisation, actually, well, it is in the top 6 corporations, is not the leader. It's actually Disney followed by Time Warner. And Time Warner owns Warner Brothers Studios, New Line Cinema, Time Magazine, Time Warner Cable, as well as its profitable HBO subscription television arm. Now, to end, I think it's important, therefore, to realise that there's a difference between this kind of complex storytelling that we have in America and the kind that we've had in British television before. Adam said to me when he invited me to this talk, obviously we don't want to go talk about Dennis Potter, but I can't resist bringing a little bit of Dennis Potter in at the end, and also plugging his Adam's journal, Screenwriting, which was a special edition devoted to the singing detective, which has a lot of interesting pieces in it. It's very useful, actually, for, I would say, for the development of Potter studies. Now, one article that really took my attention was from an associate professor at Ohio State University called Sean Sullivan, who has written a piece in which he compares something like The Singing Detective, very acclaimed 1986 TV drama, often regarded as one of the high points of high-end British television drama. He compares it with, say, something like The Sopranos, and he puts it this way. He calls it the difference between bridges and gaps. That whereas a show like The Sopranos and other long-form American television drama of recent years is very much about seriality and about the gaps between episodes and the rhythms of the serial. So, for example, Tony Soprano, each week sitting down with his psychotherapist, psychiatrist Jennifer Melfi, to discuss his problems of the week, which mirrors, in a sense, the TV audience, the TV drama audience, who originally watching on the HBO network, sitting down week after week to watch the show. And O'Sullivan compares that with a work like The Singing Detective, which is also a serial, but a serial not of many episodes, but a serial just with a fixed number of episodes, 6 episodes, an episodic serial in Alvarado and Tulloch's terms, in which the serial works not to create gaps, but to actually create associations, what O'Sullivan calls bridges. So everything is linked in The Singing Detective. There's no unresolved storylines. Everything coheres. And I would argue that, it's a very interesting article because in Adam's collection, because it's an American used to American television drama trying to figure out what The Singing Detective is and seeing it as a very alien object, certainly within the current contemporary American television landscape. But for us in Britain, particularly those of us who maybe grown up with the tradition of British television drama, it makes a lot of sense. And for me, that idea of connections is part of a long tradition within British television drama at the high end of what one might call art television, influenced by developments in theatre, which then transplants the idea to television, the idea of a writer expressing him or herself creatively without any generic restrictions or formal constraints. And Potter very much works within that tradition, or worked within that tradition of the authored drama. And the idea that everything coheres is all because essentially Potter is working in a modernist vein in which his dramas are all about associative psychological connections. All my plays, he once said, are about the same thing. They're about what goes on inside people's heads. So what he's trying to do with his television drama is to mimic the rhythms and movements of the mind. And the mind can free associate. It's not got the constraints of sequentialism, one thing following another, that characterises the serial format. So although The Sopranos and The Singing Detective are both, if you like, psychiatric dramas, they're both about excavating the psyche of their main protagonist, The Singing Detective works in a different way. Now, to conclude, a very last slide before we go to Q&A. We're now, of course, as I mentioned earlier with Kevin Spacey's address to the target lecture, we're now in an era of TV drama that may come after TV, where TV dramatists or non-cinema filmed drama may no longer be on TV, but actually online through companies like Netflix commissioning original online material. And Kevin Spacey is, in his McTaggart lecture, offered a glowing, rosy picture of this, that this would be a great future for for television drama and unleash creativity. Well, my final point would be, well, maybe. The future could be with a thousand flowers bloom, with a rich ecology of diverse forms, or it could be, and where the money is, a long-form television fiction that produces its own carapace and its own constraints on the creative process, however rich and complex the storytelling may seem. The jury's out, but I'll be interested to hear your views about some of those points. Hi. Yeah.
I was sort of interested in this sort of idea of kind of play, this sort of. I'm not a Doctor Who fan, so forgive me, but the kind of placement of mysterious, and I've noticed that sort of appearing more and more, and it's very much relates to cross-platform, and I wonder if it isn't as a result of the kind of the blogging fan universe, and also the kind of the potential, obviously 360 degrees of television programming, so that you have to kind of put something into the main show so that these other universes and other screens have somewhere to go. I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a function of science fiction and cult TV in the way that it's developed. I mean, we know look to American The Lost, for example, where it had a strong online presence. Doctor Who's played around with that a little bit, and we've had sort of webisodes as well, where we've had sort of prequels and sequels of various kinds. The main episode being shown on the web. I don't think the BBC's quite got its digital act together in the same way as, say, a show like Lost has. And I think the enigmas and the story arcs, etc., are really to reward the very loyal fan, the original Hovians who know the classic series back to front. But at the same time as well, to grow a new fan base who follow the show, will not just be a casual viewer. I mean, Russell T Davies had the dilemma when he first started, that he wasn't sure whether the show was going to work. Because Doctor Who had been a joke in British television drama commissioning circles for years. So would it work? So he had to try and embrace everything. So he had to have the one-off episodes designed just to capture the casual viewer, at the same time to try and grow a new audience for Doctor Who, because the original Movians were aging and kids didn't know about it in 2005. They do now, of course. So I think the enigmas, etc., and story arcs were all designed, for television, really, rather than the other forms. But yes, over the years, Doctor Who has tried to experiment with that digital strategy. I'm not sure it's entirely got it right yet so far.
I would maybe ask a supplementary question there, because I also found it interesting that how you describe Doctor Who as kind of with an American heart beating, and I think how it has kind of used some of those structures is very interesting. But I was at a presentation at the Screenwriting Research Network conference in the summer, where an American writer and screenwriting scholar was enthusing about Doctor Who in its Britishness, but also particularly in what it was able to do politically in terms of casting, kind of racial casting, out gay characters, political themes or whatever, and she saw it as a kind of extraordinary that such a thing was likewise advertised on Hollywood Boulevard or whatever, that actually and maybe that continues with something which what I found very interesting in the sense that kind of British television is kind of always American, part American, and maybe to think about that historic relationship of cross-pollination from one to the other.
Yeah, that's, we tend, I was guilty as anyone, to write about British television drama or American television drama. But I think what's starting to emerge is a picture that there's always been this transatlantic traffic going on. Each side has been looking at the other, and the Americans looked at masterpiece theatre, and some of our single play tradition back in the 70s and the 80s. Doctor Who, in order to invent something, to reinvent something, Russell T Davies needed to drop on something, some existing model that a contemporary audience, including the British audience, would identify with. So he looked to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Obviously, one can't really argue against that evidence. One can offer readings of Doctor Who, but here's the evidence that Russell T Davies really stole story structure from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And you can certainly, I've heard papers actually, people talking about it, and this is much more detailed presentations, student presentations, people talking about it. So each has learned from the other, and of course the Americans are responding to Doctor Who as some sort of exotic object, because unlike the Starship Enterprise, which is corporate and militaristic, collective, moving through space, in a militaristic fashion, you've got this quirky, individual, whimsical figure who travels around in a police box. It's also English, it's also British. But at the same time, in deep structure, the new Doctor Who, the revived Doctor Who, has borrowed, at least in the early years, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Interestingly, Stephen Moffat is experimenting a little bit with getting rid of many of the two-parters. He went through, in 2011, he had this extremely complex story arc, timey-wimey and river song and all that stuff. And in 2012 and 2013, the series 7, I think, which was split over 2 years in terms of its broadcast, he went back to sort of single episodes. So Doctor Who this year has become an episodic series again.
Which is more American.
But with that, or perhaps more accurately I should say, in Alvarado and Tulloch's terms, sequential series, in the sense that you've got to watch each episode in order, because there's this underlying story about who is the impossible girl and the enigma of Clara. So Stephen Moffat is experimenting a little bit away from the Russell T Davies here. The question is whether it's as successful. I mean, if Doctor Who fans criticised a lot of Russell T Davies' tenure, but my goodness, he got the ratings for Doctor Who. I suggest some.
It's like biting a hand that feeds you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Exceedingly interesting. Just a couple of things. I think there's a stage in the middle somewhere in the kind of 80s in that move from episodic series in the move from series with coherent episodes that have an ending to serial narratives. There's a point where you get series with stories that have an ending, but the characterization and it's the soapification of the police series, for instance, with Hill Street Blues or some of those. So you get, your serial element isn't about mystery or secret. It's not substantial in that sense to the story. So you don't need to watch every episode in a way to get the story, but it is really important to characterization. So that over the years, marriages fall apart and children are born and people die and that kind of thing. But at the same time, crimes are being solved every week.
Right, like
and that's I think that's slightly different, and I would situate that in the 80s. And I think it's different from these American serialized things where I can't watch them because you have to watch them every week, and I don't have time. I'm too busy watching other things. So the other thing is this whole issue about binge viewing versus television's traditional will maybe wait, and that I think is where it's going to be fought out. And I myself, being very old-fashioned, actually quite like being made to wait. And I think the recent Broadchurch on British television, which was very traditional, 8 episodes, it didn't even have next week on Broadchurch. They wouldn't even tell you a hint of what was going to happen next week. So they made you wait, and the pleasures of waiting, I think, are much underestimated by the current controllers of TV drama, who think that everyone wants to sit down for 6 hours and watch the whole of House of Cards. And I think Spacey is such an untypical television viewer, it's ludicrous that he has any opinions on it.
But it's his choice.
He runs a theatre, he doesn't watch television.
It's his choice.
No, but the point is that if this wins, if Netflix wins, that will be it.
They will win. They've got 30
They've won.
million.
No, they don't got
40 million.
The BBC
subscribers.
40 million.
If people...
That's nothing
No.
for the world.
No, think about it.
It's nothing.
If there's a population of people pay £6 per month, and you think of the money that would generate, they've already got 2 or 3. They're remaking things like Arrested Development.
That's the question I was going to raise.
They're going to change the landscape of viewers. BBC controllers are scratching their heads.
Yes, they are, because they aren't confident now.
The
But this will win in the end.
But what they're doing, what's interesting, is they're also what Netflix is having to do, and Amazon Studio are going back to also a model of the one-off viewing and the kind of, it's funny, it's sort of shifted back, because you're a little tiny bit behind. This now, what they've discovered in the research, and you probably know, but you know your numbers well, is that they've discovered that actually people do want that sort of event as well. So they're actually beginning to program like traditional television again.
Do you want to have a go?
I was just going to talk about Arrested Development, because season 4 of Arrested Development, shamefully I haven't actually watched season 4 yet because I have Netflix, but the way that it's structured, you can watch the episodes in any order. It seems to be, I was just wanted to know if you had any view on this new
well, yeah, I mean, we're hearing it all in the debate there. I mean, it's up for grabs. There are massive commercial forces at work here. I mean, I was reading just before travelling down the train today, I was reading on the web that one of the principal shareholders of Netflix has just cashed in his shares in, I think, about half his stake in it for about something like $427 million, thanking Kevin Spacey, because basically what's happened is the share price of Netflix has gone way high, and lots of investors are saying that Netflix is now overpriced. So what are the principal investors doing? They're getting their profits and getting out there. So this whole Netflix enterprise might bounce back upon itself. I think we must underestimate that there's big business here. There's a lot of talk about the BBC should be the next HBO, etc. The BBC is a public service broadcaster. This is commercial. Big money commercial playing that's going on here. But there is a potentiality to come back to the Arrested Development point, because Kevin Spacey was saying, I think Christine was paraphrasing it. It's been tagged like, if they want to binge, let them binge, but watch all this stuff instead of it being broken up. But on the other hand, it does suggest that plus DVD box sets, that people are hungry for perhaps watching something that eventually. They're hungry for maybe something that closes, that has closure. And it may be that, for example, if we can get a more diverse TV drama ecology, where it's not just the long-form serial that's dominating, where, for example, you might get more of a one-off or two-parters, or indeed the episodic series coming back. There's potential there. That's why I'm suggesting there's potential of TV drama after TV. The seriality has become almost routine in terms of the most natural way for network television. But I grew up, as did a number of people in this room, with a much more diverse TV drama ecology in which there was serials, yes, but also series and single plays. And I'm an old fart, I champion the single play as well, the one-off TV drama which can provide an experience. So perhaps there is a potentiality for something like Netflix to be able to develop a more diverse TV drama ecology. Netflix has actually overtaken HBO in terms of the number of subscribers that it has. Maybe the HBO eventually will go online, for example, to compete. So there's a potentiality, but we shouldn't be pie-eyed about this. There's massive commercial money. If you invest so many dollars. You want a series that returns season after season after season. You pay the actors, you get the high quality, production values that appeal to the upscale audiences, and you invested in the sets. So that there's a commercial logic for this sort of stuff. And sometimes I think that's missed in the sort of celebratory, including in academia, celebratory discourses around HBO. So that's really our point today.
Chris,
one of the characteristics that has been at the heart of TV for so long, traditional television, is kind of a shared experience, people able to talk about the shows they watch, and audiences still do that, they just find different ways to do it. So whether that's grouping around a box set and then sharing that experience via something like The Guardian online, or whether that's with reality TV and things like the Great British Bake Off and the hashtags that allow kind of tweet casting and people to stay engaged socially. Maybe the platform on which we consume this television is shifted, but the same sorts of audience engagement seek to persist. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think there's still a social experience to be had.
And probably enough liveness is coming back. You know, if you want to tweet during a show, you know, the live show like the X Factor, that's exciting. There's adrenaline rather than, you know, tweeting over a recorded episode of something. So again, you know, there are countervailing tendencies here. It's not a homogenous direction. Of course, reality TV is an entirely different beast to what I'm talking about today.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of contribute. I was really interested at the early influence of America in Sydney Newman. I mean, he really was. Also, my background is kind of ex-professional TV producer now teaching, but back in other places. So, but I was very interested, we talked about the killing as if it was a new form of entertainment, but in fact they sent their people over to America also to learn how to do long form drama, which is on the BBC media. I thought very, very interesting. The other point I wanted to pick up on was your point about the tyranny of the showrunner. Well, having worked in British series television, I have to say, I would say working in series restricts. I don't think it's the showrunner. You can get bad showrunner and get good showrunner. I would say, having worked in British series television, if you're the poor writer coming in with your episode, you feel really hampered by the restrictions of the show, just as much as if there was a single showrunner. So I don't think it's particularly showrunner.
In fact, I wanted to pick up on that a little bit because, you know, but also that the comments both that from some personal experience, but also certainly from kind of discussions, is actually if that showrunner is themselves a writer, or if that person, you know, how they see themselves and their role, and maybe also as the power has shifted, the first power shift in Britain, which was, you know, from, you know, the BBC was there too. There were a whole lot of writers that you went and you found good ones and you commissioned them and they did stuff. If you liked them and they liked you, or they got good writing, they did more stuff. Was the sense that kind of happened, I suppose, post the kind of politicization of the BBC, that the aim was to kind of, I think Tony Garnett put it very carefully in the lecture he gave at BFI, where he said, somebody said that they had management consultants coming into the BBC saying, how many people can make decisions that affect your brand? And they said kind of actually thousands, you know, hundreds of people could at that point commission shows which would affect the brand. And he said, that's a really big problem. And actually, so that as the kind of consolidation of the BBC has actually meant that, you know, there are fewer and fewer people who are able to sign off, and then everybody, it's not just the restrictions of the particular show, but actually how that is, it's those people themselves being managed. And what was very interestingly also in Danish drama, as Eva Redvall said, is actually one of the key. It happened as part of a restructuring of Danish television and PR, who said, you know, we have to make sure that decisions can be taken at the lowest possible level of kind of those creative decisions, and maybe the showrunner, for good and evil, has been able to protect that. Yes. Because, and what I find very interesting is maybe also that the management of writers, that, for example, David Chase can recognise Matthew Weiner as a writer on the basis of his spec script for Mad Men, invite him to be an executive producer on season 5, I think, of The Sopranos, although clearly what he's recognising as a kind of quality of ability to write character or create a world, and say, actually, we can take this. Well, I would imagine I can think of very, very few British writers who would take somebody at the kind of level that Matthew Vine and recognise that somebody who'd written a great kind of...
But they're not the producers.
Exactly, that's exactly the point. The producers are.
The writers are just writers. In America, the writers are producers.
Yes, I know, but I'm saying that producers maybe had a, producers are, I would say, often who are the ones who are home and stay in television are ones who are kind of, often it's their skills to kind of thrive in that environment rather than necessarily to kind of recognise that this work, the person who writes this could also do that, or maybe could do that even though they're invested.
Yeah, I think, tyranny was maybe a bit strong. I mean, it wasn't...
No, you're right about Aaron Sorkin.
But Aaron Sorkin. But yeah, it is, Adam's point, within the very fierce environment of American television, a writer as a producer can be a protective force and protect and nurture the writer. In Britain, British television drama, what I'm talking about here is, if you like, where British television drama is trying to aspire to. At the moment, British television drama, it's still functioning as traditionally 6-parters, 4-parters. There's no single plays, but there hasn't been for a generation. But British television drama is still day in, day out doing pretty much formally what it's done for the last 20 years. So there are it's only really Doctor Who that's adopted the kind of American model showrunner, 13 episodes. But that may change. We may start to see more, not breaking out of the science fiction cult TV area where that's been allowed by the executives on British television. We may start to see an equivalent to House of Cards, and of course, for those with a long memory will realise, of course, House of Cards was actually a 4-parter in 1990 originally, which has been, in order to be Americanised in the contemporary has had to be extended out to 13 episodes and lots of intricate interweaving storylines. So showrunners can be very useful within the American television drama context. But over the last 20 years, you're absolutely right, Adam, in British television drama, the general refrain has been that the power has been taken away from the writer, and it's in the hands of not producers or executive producers, but the commissioners, the drama. So it's only you hear the old refrain of it's only 1 or 2 people that I can go to these days to get my script even looked at, things like that. So it's. These changes are, it may gradually, some of these changes may start to come into British television, but British television is still functioning in its traditional way, I would say.
I wondered if you also got any, you talked about the Potter influence and also that piece by Shawnee Sargent. There are a number of other people who were talking about the kind of I think both Glenn Creamer and Tim Corrigan talk about the continuing influence of Potter, but maybe also some of the relationship, for example, with that and The Sopranos. And I wondered whether you thought that there was both creative possibility in the areas that these series are going in terms of kind of exploring formal concerns. For example, things like the dream sequence, or is flash forwards and stuff, of features of all of these. Certainly of Mad Men, The Sopranos, of Breaking Bad, kind of use quite interesting formal interventions or explorations of what medium might do.
Yeah, absolutely. The non-naturalistic storytelling, non-naturalism, which is what's often Potter's style is described as in literature. Yeah, an interesting question would be, and it's one sometimes raised, what would Dennis Potter be doing if he were alive today? He'd be very old, but imagine Dennis Potter as he was at the time of The Singing Detective. would he be working for HBO, and you know, maybe he would be working for HBO. But the thing is that Potter would not like the idea of working under someone else's set of characters. So, for example, being asked to come in and write an episode of The Sopranos, for example, which, you know, have a dream sequence, or Tony Soprano wanders through hell, or what have you. You don't do that. So, if Potter was going to work for HBO today, and we can sort of speculate, I think he would be interested in reaching the American market, because we know that from the fact that, you know, he worked in Hollywood. I think what he would do is seek some sort of HBO, BBC tie-up, and I think he would crucially want not these big long seasons, but something that was 6 or maximum 8 episodes, in which he would write every episode, and everything would be worked through, associated with one filter, one artist. You know, I interviewed Dennis Potter, that's one of my claims to fame, and, you know, I said to him, where does all these structures come from, you know? Because, of course, I was a PhD student at the time, quite methodically trying to go through these themes, because I mean, he was getting a bit exasperated with this. He says, the structures are all in my head, because in the way that he worked as a writer was through this, I use the term associative psychological connections. Everything connects, and that's what Sean O'Sullivan, the Americans, are picking up and regarding as alien in his article in The Singing Detective. And in terms of contemporary TV drama with its non-naturalistic experimentations, the big difference is that they will experiment and they'll have a sort of interesting, quirky episode. But the thing is, they have to go back because of the constraints and of the concept and the endless episodes in every season. They have to go back to the realistic narrative storytelling. And that's why I think of all the pieces that touch on this issue in your journal, Adam, I think Sean O'Sullivan is the most productive, because he doesn't just sort of say, oh, it's the same as The Singing Detective. He actually says, no, actually there's a qualitative difference, that what American television drama is doing is about seriality and gaps. What Potter is trying to do is essentially to efface the seriality. He started in single plays, remember. He branched out into the serial in order to create a bigger canvas for himself. So what he's about is trying to create an experience which the audience goes into week after week, which everything connects. So The Singing Detective is all about gathering all these different clues and ultimately trying to solve the mystery. And in the case of The Singing Detective, the mystery of self, which is actually really what its theme is. Stephen.
You talked a lot about the connections between individual episodes and developing storylines. Just purely as an impressionist, my sense of Doctor Who is that you occasionally get a brilliant story within an episode, but overall, having to compress the whole story into one episode, the story about it, makes them being terribly rushed, and the way they get out of it is because it's fantasy. How are we going to get out of this? We'll just plug the vacuum cleaner into the space-time continuum. And it's all that kind of stuff. And narratively, the individual episode, with some exceptions, really a bit of a mess, I think. I mean, it's getting worse.
Worse for that. Well, yes, well, I'm just thinking there, of course, remember in classic Doctor Who, they used to reverse the polarity of the neutron force. It's the same thing. No, you're absolutely right. And that's as a viewer of Doctor Who, and a sort of, I hesitate to say fan, but someone that's grown up watching the show and loves the show as part of my life, my childhood, certainly, is that everything is terribly rushed. And in that sense, that's actually turning our arguments on its head. Actually, it's needing seriality, more seriality, and it's actually because of the Americanized structure that Russell T Davies brought in at the start, with instead of these episodic serials that we used to have in classic Doctor Who, we had a 4-parter or a 6-parter, which was regarded as too slow perhaps for the modern audience. You need everything quick, in case the kids switch over. And so a lot of that, I think particularly adult Doctor Who viewers miss about the old Doctor Who, the fact that there was time to develop a story. But, for example, I recall reading that Jane Tranter, who was then the head of TV drama at the time that Doctor Who came in 2005, and was closely involved in the development of the series, when she was watching episodes of the first season, where of course they didn't know what they had in their hands. She was saying things like, like the show, make it faster, take the historicals, as she called them, the historical stories up the arts, make them faster. So it's clearly to do with the feeling that they don't want to lose the core audience, which are the children, essentially, in terms of the way BBC regards the show. Albeit, of course, it's a show that reaches beyond children, but they can't lose the children. If they lose the children, they're dead ultimately, because of course it can't go on and survive. But you're absolutely right, the stories are rushed, and it's actually when we have a two-parter or a season finale that maybe the arc has been built, that actually becomes more satisfying, I think, certainly for adult Doctor Who viewers. I haven't read any research, I don't know if anyone knows of any academic research where academics have interviewed the child audience at all. Is there any research on that? I'd be interested to find out what today's children think of Doctor Who. I've talked to a few children, but it's not very systematic.
Sorry, I'm just going to return a bit to some of the debate earlier on. I think what's at stake here in a way is television, to my mind, has traditionally been nationally specific.
Can I just ask you, before you go, that if you haven't signed yet, there's a little sheet of paper going on, which was going around, because I know that a lot of people arrived afterwards, and it's very helpful for our funding. We have your, we can say that you came, but also we will then, of course, let you know about subsequent sessions, some of which will deal with different areas of drama. So I'm sorry to have interrupted.
Yes, it's just that I think television has been nationally specific, even though clearly there are connections, what have you, so that on Japanese, Korean soap operas get shown in Japan and Thailand. So it's not that it's nationally kind of blocked off, but nevertheless they're viewed differently, and there are local programming as well that goes along with it. And I suppose that's what I think is a bit at stake here, and that the British journalists and TV executives obeisance to something like The Wire. It seems to me is in grave danger of overinflating the success of these programs. They obviously are very successful, but and ignoring what is actually being successful. This summer, for instance, on British television, we had, whether Top of the Lake was entirely successful, I'm not sure, but we had Top of the Lake, we had The Guilty, and we had another Channel 4 one called South Cliff, exactly. All of which got higher ratings than any of these do. All of which created a Twitter-type debate. All of which were somehow or other, perhaps not Top of the Lake, but the other two were about Britain and what it feels like to be here. All of which had fantastic performances, including Gillian Anderson, an American.
The Fall.
The Fall was that, yeah, not The Guilty. But we don't care about that. We're too busy saying how wonderful Lost and The Wire are. I just think it's
critical acclaim through the roof, and that's what commissioners responded to. But of course, ratings-wise, the television drama audience, it prefers by and large, homegrown drama, and but I suppose I'm talking really about the way in which television drama commissioners. It's clear, from the history that I've set out that television practitioners are always looking over each other's shoulders in different countries, see what could be brought in. And it's very fascinating that the Danes actually went to America. I didn't know that. And of course, America being the home of Hollywood, of course they're going to look to America for a lot of their inspiration, perhaps, but to reversion to local formats, and of course. Globalisation, we're now in a globalised television era, and of course with the power of the internet and online, it's now, any of us can fairly easily watch television from all sorts of different parts of the world. We might not choose to do so, but we've got the technical capability of doing it.
In fact, just to come back in there before opening it up again, I know that we had many people from the MA and International Broadcasting abroad. I know that Chinese producers came to Britain in the 90s to find out how to make a costume drama, because this was a kind of a new historical drama that particulars, was something that was going to be reinvented or re-explored, and also that Britain was the place that they decided to send people to find out about it. Now, so Downton Abbey is very big in China, is that right?
But what I think is sort of interesting too is Tony Gilroy was recently speaking via BAFTA at the Screenwriters series. I don't know if anybody was there, but he said something very interesting, which is, of course I'm going to write TV because I get to create this incredible universe, and I only have to have 3 million people watch it, and I'm a rock star.
Well, yeah.
So the ratings, when I make TV, if you didn't get 10 million, you weren't renewed.
And that's all changed now. Yeah. This is what the whole wave of development in America has been about. The multi-channel era has opened up spaces like HBO that weren't there before. I mean, that's received history now. That HBO, the network, the networks have their lowest common denominator. But what we're seeing with these are new types of development is a more sophisticated commercial system, away from the old sort of mass audience, and trying to target the people that are attractive to broadcasters in America, which is the affluent, the educated, the upscale. These trends now feed into network drama. So HBO et al. Has raised the game of American network drama in terms of the way that it produces. And at the same time, I think we're beginning to see, although Christine's absolutely right to say that television drama here in Britain is continuing pretty much as it did, it's clear that this sort of stuff is in commissioners' minds. The fact that they invited Kevin Spacey to give the McTaggart lecture this year, the fact that, for example, if we look at British television dramas currently on, Peaky Blinders, Boardwalk Empire for the UK, Breathless being touted as a hospital drama set in the 60s, being touted as the kind of British Mad Men. There's some part of that is press PR, but it may also be the way in which these dramas were originally pitched. I don't know that to say that, I can't claim that, the evidence for that is just a possibility. It did occur to me that maybe, certainly, you open the Radio Times and they're talking about, is this the Mad Men for Britain, etc., etc. Looking for a period drama set in the 60s that's all about, repressions gradually being...
Isn't that the Masters of Sex now on Channel 4?
What's the hour?
Well, the Masters of Sex is a Showtime drama, and so that's an American drama. But so that's Showtime's attempt to copy AMC's Mad Men, and then Christine's mentioning The Hour, which was kind of touted as being a sort of British Mad Men, although I think that's being a little unjust to The Hour. I think it's doing a lot of other things as well. So, but in terms of commissioners and the way in which the environment is talking, the way the industry practitioners are debating, talking amongst themselves, that's really what I'm looking at today, rather than the reality of what is in the schedules at the moment. I'm really looking at trends that may happen in the future.
So just to add to that is that it's all about the money. The reason we're having to make all these long-running shows and have to look at the American model is because we can't afford to fund drama in the UK. And there was a show that they did, Hunted, which was funded by BBC and Cinemax, which is at HBO. And the poor show was pulled in 2 directions by 2 different commissions wanting 2 different things, and it just couldn't. But that is going to be the problem. That is going to be I totally understand what you're saying about keeping the national voice and identity, but what I worry is that we're going to be the heritage drama world. We're going to have to talk about just costume drama or maybe some Doctor Who type thing. Where are going to be what's happening in Britain now that we're here nationally? Where are going to be the multicultural Britain type stories? They won't get them
because then it's a commissioning meeting, and I was told point blank that BBC World, what they want is a green field, so you can do anything green, you can do anything costume, don't put any ethnic characters. If you are going to put them in, let them be really interesting, like Stephen Poliarkov. And you can do that because we can sell that to the Americans. Think of what we can sell to the Americans. Let's first talk.
Well, there we go. There's
Sorry to be depressing, but
I have hope. Which is the audience's producer, and I think that's what's very interesting, and that's where you'll see kind of what Amazon Studios is doing, which is commissioning 14 pilots, right? I think they've shot most of the pilots now.
Yes.
Can I say something?
Please,
I'm just a master student here, but I studied in LA for a year. So actually, I kind of know, and I studied TV and film there, and I came here. So what I know about American, just my own experience, is I could understand that, but here more like the culture here makes me feel like I'm not that easy to understand, and I guess that's probably one reason why American TV shows can sell well, because it's very low context. People can understand, like it's no culture at all, like ever. No, I'm sorry. I'd say it's too over, but it's like they're just talking topics everybody can understand, like from different countries, common topic, like life or something. Not like for example, like British. Even if I have made some, I think many British friends, sometimes I still can get like their British humors or within the long history humors or culture thing. And I guess that's really like I feel like. The amazing thing this culture has, just how to make it like other culture to understand it. I think if you, I don't know, because I mean, if I can understand it, I feel like all Chinese can understand it, and that's fine. All Asian can understand it, then it's global.
That's a very interesting point, and to respond to that, I think that's really, really useful. I think maybe I would also say that I think in shows like, let's say, like Mad Men or The Sopranos or In the Wire or Breaking Bad, all of which are actually set in very different cultures, but the show teaches you about the culture. And I think very often in British drama, the kind of information about the culture is outside the drama, and we are kind of ironically picking up on the references by kind of knowingly understanding, particularly in Britain, class references, which they happen in the drama, but they rely on our pool of knowledge outside the drama. Although The Sopranos, let's say, is at least as nuanced a world of hierarchies and understanding when people have kind of transgressed or whatever. One, you're taught quite quickly that you've transgressed, because if you transgress, you get whacked, do you know? But also, actually, the show makes a point of opening up, letting us understand the context. What's a very, very foreign context, because it's not addressing an audience of mafia watchers, and it's actually also talking about some ways in which the mafia is different from what we expect it to be. But it makes a real point, I think, of constantly making those points clear, and I think it's a real problem with British television, and one of the reasons, some of the problems I have with the shows that you reference, Christine, because I feel that there's an incredible sense where the show doesn't happen in the show. And one of the things I also feel about American drama is actually the debate about society happens in the show, and I feel all in British TV, we all know that the homophobic character is going to be bad, and the feminist character is going to be good, and even in the hour we have to say, yes, that has a very sexist remark, but one day there will be a world where women are able to work in the BBC, and that there's a sense in which kind of people are...
Which absolutely has a hug at the end.
Yes, and
that's what they do.
And so there's not an opportunity to fully put it. I think it's really important. Maybe we should make sure that there's somebody...
But that's why this show was so great, because I moved to the UK when that show was on. I thought, oh my God, I've moved to the right place, and I'm doing the right thing, because they can make a show like House of Cards. So it is... Yeah.
The original one.
The original one, yeah, it's 1990.
Yeah. But sooner or later, anyway, there will be somebody from China in the pitch meeting making sure, deciding whether or not it can be funded. So maybe this is going to be both the solution as well.
I found this, like sometimes when I was talking to my British friends and they was kind of in group and they began to laugh, and I felt like I was out of it. And I began to think, and I have to ask them, like, I guess because I'm pretty outgoing, like most Chinese girls, they're just keep quiet, so they cannot just stay in group. I guess that's why. And I have to ask them, why you guys laugh? And they began to laugh again because I couldn't understand. And I have to keep asking, can you explain to me why you guys feel like it's really funny? And then some of them will explain to me, and I feel, oh, I understand. There are actually something behind it, but I don't know. And I feel like if I don't know if like British, even like media or films can just speak out why it's funny. I feel like when I feel like I don't understand some of the humor, I feel it's really funny. Just need to explain it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is that very well.
Game of Thrones.
Because Game of Thrones, it feels like you've got two types of engagement with that. It's great that it's made in America, HBO, but to a British audience, you hear the regionalisation of it, you totally get why you've got people that say, you know nothing, Jon Snow, and that's the North, and you've got the light, you've got the Dothraki and the other, but
filmed in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, there's maybe detection that's lost if you don't know that kind of regionalisation.
Was it 10 years ago, I think Jeanette Stevens writes about it in her book, Selling Television. I mean, it was identified in, I think, the government in 2003 Communication Act that British TV needed to export more. And so I think there was definitely pressure at that time, partly government-led, to have more British TV needs to look outwards more and export more. And so a lot of what we've seen over the last 10 years, less so in drama, but with things like Doctor Who, I guess, being certainly the prime BBC example, more things like in reality formats. Reality TV has become highly exportable. And so, you know, you see a lot of British people, including Simon Cowell over there in Hollywood. So we've had that. Certainly, that's a development in the last 10 years. Whereas before it was very rare to see a Brit in Hollywood. Before 2000, it was quite. There are a lot of Brits out there now, so that's a change, I think.
Well, I suppose we had Empire. So, if you had Empire, you didn't have to worry. You just gave it to your colonies, didn't you?
Yeah, you could sell the program.
You had upstairs downstairs. I think America was held hostage by upstairs downstairs when I was a child.
I mean, I think that's a very good point to stop. We can stay and do please have a glass of wine with us. But I mean, let's thank Jon very much. Also, for the more heated sessions that we have, and I think that's only a good thing. We have some copies of the Journal of Screenwriting which have been sent to us by Intellect because they're very excited or would like. So there are some free copies, including of the Singing Detective issue, which has not only the Bridges and Gaps article, but a very good article by Jon. Reflecting back on his engagement with the work over 25 years, and some interview with John O'Neill, the director of the original show. So do have a look at it, or take one of the other ones if you would prefer. We're looking always for journal people to submit articles to continue the kind of debate about screenwriting. The next session will be on the 5th of December.